Abraham Dayton was born in 1745 to a family of American Quakers. Though his place of birth is unknown, his family was of British descent. Dayton was a deeply religious man and chose to move to the Wyoming Valley rather than turn into a, quote, fighting Quaker, unquote, during the American Revolution. He married Abigail Cogswell in 1770, and the two later relocated to Connecticut. In 1782, the couple became enthusiastic followers of Jemima Wilkinson, a religious zealot and the prophetess of the area. Dayton even deeded a piece of his land to this following for the, quote, purposes of promotion of the cause of God and the advancement of the true church, unquote. By 1786, this sect was facing criticism in Connecticut. Dayton was even chosen for a committee to scout out a new location for the group, and eventually settled on a section of land near Seneca Lake, New York, in 1788. After the lease for this property was declared null and void by the New York legislature, Dayton sold his interest in the property in 1791 and made his way to Upper Canada. Not long after, in the fall of 1791, Dayton, who was accompanied by a small party, came across the area of the Burford Plains. The remoteness, the open area, and the access to water made this the ideal spot for their new settlement, and Dayton petitioned to Governor John Graves Simcoe for a section of land, quote, on the path leading from the Mohawk village on the Grand River and on a creek that empties into the Grand River about 12 miles above said village, unquote. The creek in mention being Whiteman's Creek. In 1795, Dayton fell ill with consumption, a general term to describe any sort of pulmonary disease. And it was on March 1st, 1797, that Dayton passed away. Now, Abigail Dayton was born on August 13th, 1750, in New Milford, and was raised primarily by her devoutly religious grandmother. She followed her husband Abraham to Upper Canada and also claimed to be born with, quote, second sight. One of her visions came to her in 1793, just before she and Abraham set out for Burford. A voice told her to, quote, tell Abraham to take the stones and grind meal, unquote. She relayed the message to Abraham, who had great faith in his wife's visions, and he did as she asked. When the Daytons arrived in Upper Canada, there was a poor harvest in the area, and the supplies that they had traveled with saved many in the area from starvation. In early 1798, 3 years after Abraham's passing, Abigail received a letter from a Colonel Joel Stone, founder of Gananoque, and acquaintance from New Milford. He was also recently widowed and was inquiring for Abigail's hand in marriage. His letter arrived on April 13th, and her response, nearly a month and a half later, is as follows. Quote, I received your letter, which caused me to write. I am not engaged to anyone, and I have almost concluded not to change my condition. If you think it proper to form a further acquaintance on the subject by these lines which I write you, act on your own pleasure. Unquote. Eventually, the two were married in 1799, and Abigail moved from Burford to Gananoque. During the War of 1812, the Stones' house was attacked by American troops, and Abigail and her maids were alone to defend the house. Loading every gun in the home, she held an admirable defense, but her home was eventually ransacked by the troops. Having been shot in the hip, she recovered, though walked with a limp for the rest of her life, and she passed away on September 4th, 1843, at the age of 93. In 1793, Peter Fairchild and his brothers settled on about 3.5 miles of land northeast of Boston, Ontario. When other settlers arrived in the area, they built a small church, of which Peter was the first pastor. He married Sarah Fuller, and the pair had 10 children. Their oldest, Benjamin, married Elizabeth Haviland. Their next child, Peter, also married a Sarah, and the two stayed home on the farm. The next brother, Isaac, didn't stay on the farm, rather settling near Fairchild's Creek, hence the name, and had 13 children with his wife, Lucy. Isaac and Lucy later moved to Oakland Township. Isaac's daughter, Elvira, married James Malcolm, who was quite active in the 1837 rebellions. James escaped capture by traveling to the United States. And when Upper Canadian soldiers came to collect James, only to find that he had escaped, they set fire to the property and killed all the livestock. Luckily, Elvira, along with her 4 children, made the 4-mile trek through swamp to find safety at her father's house. Henry Ellis and his family were some of the earliest settlers in the area of Mount Pleasant following the American Revolution. As a Loyalist family in Pennsylvania, they were having trouble with the new state government disputing their claims of property damage. And Henry was born in Mount Pleasant, Wales, before heading to Donegal, Ireland, where he met his wife, Margaret. The two traveled to America together in the late 1760s. With their decision made to make their way to British North America, they brought with them 4 of their 7 children, including 2 sons, John, 19 years old at the time, and Alan, who was 11. Now, neighbors to the Ellises in Pennsylvania, the Sturgis family were also integral to the growth of Mount Pleasant. Family legend describes their situation as, quote, almost destitute, unquote, following the Revolution, even though Patriarch Amos Sturgis fought alongside Washington as captain of the 1st Pennsylvania Volunteers Riflemen. A well-off farming family before the war, their stone house and barn were destroyed by the Patriot Army, and this led to the decision to leave for a new life in British North America. Amos traveled with his wife Rachel, sons William and John, daughter Hannah, and daughter-in-law Rebecca McKinney. His parents, Thomas and Catherine, also made the journey after selling their 210-acre property in Upper Marion County. The Ellis and Sturgis families traveled together on their journey, setting out by 1798. And by the following spring, in 1799, they had proceeded to Burlington Bay, which is now Hamilton, and then through Ancaster. The Ancaster General Store was quite the important stop, as it was the last opportunity to purchase goods. Henry Ellis was the one who declared their new residence as Mount Pleasant, after his home in Wales, and Henry, along with Amos and William Sturgis, each leased a 200-acre farm from Joseph Brant for the term of 999 years, with the leases dated October 1st, 1801. Robert Biggar and his wife Mary, along with their 4 kids, came to Canada in 1806 and settled in Mount Pleasant by 1816. 3 of their sons served in the War of 1812, and 4 years later they had moved to Mount Pleasant on about 100 acres of land. Robert founded a tannery in Brantford and purchased land from Joseph Brant directly, while at the same time running operations on the Mount Pleasant farmstead. Robert and Mary had 12 kids, 3 girls and 9 boys, and unfortunately Mary passed away in 1826. Their children became farmers, doctors, and ministers throughout Brant County and southern Ontario. Their son Herbert helped on the family farm before engaging in mercantile pursuits in Brantford. He bought a farm on Whiteman's Creek near Paris, but returned to Mount Pleasant after his father died. He was a county councillor and reeve, as well as the first representative to the Upper Canada Parliament from 1854 to 1861. Born September 14th, 1800, Edward Kitchen came to Canada with two of his brothers in September 1818, and they located first near Simcoe. He married Eunice Culver on March 12, 1820, and the two had 11 children together. Their 6 sons, James, Alfred, Lemuel, Nesbit, Edward, and Salem, and 5 daughters, Sarah Ann, Vesta, Amanda Jane, Harriet, and Martha. In 1826, the then family of 6 moved to their farm in St. George, and Edward Kitchen was the deacon of the St. George Baptist Church for more than 40 years and was magistrate in the area for over 30. Now, James Kitchen, the oldest son of Edward and Eunice, was born on July 13, 1820, near Simcoe in Townsend Township. He married Sarah Howell on October 9, 1842, and both were active within the Baptist Church in South Dumfries as well. Their farm consisted of 232 acres, and the couple were parents to 2 daughters, Mary Jane, who was born in 1843, and Eunice Maria, born in 1845. The Kitchen family were amongst the first to introduce modern farming equipment, like the threshing machine, to the county around 1835-1836. Now, Hiram Capron, nicknamed King in the early history of Paris, was known for his dominant personality and holdings within the village. He was born in Vermont in February of 1796, and he descended from a long line of pioneering men. His great-great-grandfather, Banfield Capron, ran away from his home in England at 14 years old with 4 other boys. He found himself on a ship and eventually landed in Rhode Island. Within a few years, he had a tract of land. Eventually moving closer inland towards Massachusetts, he married 3 times, had 12 kids, and died at the age of 92. Hiram's great-grandfather, Joseph Capron, married 3 times and had 9 kids, and lived his uneventful 85 years near his father's residence in Massachusetts. Hiram's grandfather, Joseph Capron Jr., trekked northwest from Attleboro, Massachusetts, about 250 miles, where he settled, married twice, and had 15 kids. And the oldest surviving son of Joseph Capron Jr. likely fought against the British in the American Revolution. Afterwards, he returned to his father's farm, married twice, and became the father of 6 boys and 4 girls. His 4th son was Hiram. And Hiram met his wife, Mary DeLong, on a trip to Long Point in 1823. They married the following February in Townsend. 5 years later, in 1829, Hiram purchased a 1,000-acre property from William Home, on which he later cleared land and built a mill. This allowed for the production of plaster of Paris. Though he was a wealthy member of the community in Paris, Capron remained indifferent to local and municipal politics. While the community grew, he became concerned with the decisions of municipal councils and realized that there was an advantage for being involved in local politics. And unlike other leaders in pioneering communities like Brantford, Capron maintained a small role. On November 22, 1836, Allen Good and his family, his wife Eliza and 3 children, Anne, Charles, and John, left Cork, Ireland, for Canada. They first moved to Montreal, where Allen had been appointed bank manager for the Bank of Montreal. By 1837, Allen had been let go and decided to relocate to Brantford, where he had previously purchased 108 acres of land. Upon arriving in Brant County, the Good family stayed at a rental house for some months at the corner of Coburn and Dumfries Street. Allen began drawing up contracts for their new family home, which detailed a 2-story, 9-room house with 7 fireplaces and no cellar, at the cost of £467, 5 shillings, and 9 pence. This is equal to about $16,000. The property was passed down through generations of the Good family. In 1903, William Good, the grandson of Allen, was in possession of the farm and house. Many of the artifacts in the museum have found their way back to Myrtleville from previous family members. Original pieces from Eliza Good, such as the big 4-poster bed in the master bedroom and her collared piano, which is now located in the parlor, as well as the dollhouse that they gave to their daughter Anne. Likewise, William Good's handmade camera still remains in the library, along with shelves and shelves of books that the Good family enjoyed. Born in 1819 in County Armagh, Ireland, Robert Hamilton came to Canada in 1847, eventually settling in Cairnsville. An avid gardener, he grew nursery stock and had a large greenhouse and gardens on his property. The Hamilton family attended the first Cairnsville school, and J.S. Hamilton, Robert's oldest son, recalled the first time an engine and gravel train passed through. It was at recess, and all of the school children climbed up on the fence to watch it go by. They were all late to class afterwards, but their teacher excused them as it was the first engine the kids had seen. J.S. Hamilton later graduated and in 1865 secured a position in a New York wholesale business. In 1871, he returned with R.S. Dunlop, and the two started a wholesale wine and liquor business in Brantford. Hamilton later became acquainted with Thaddeus Smith and began advertising for Vine Villa Vineyards. Hamilton became the paymaster for the Dufferin Rifles in 1886 and held that position for 26 years. He was also in the wine business for over 50 years. In 1854, William and Charles Apps traveled from England to New York before making their way to Canada. The two settled in Cayuga and operated a flour mill there for 2 years before moving to Mount Vernon and buying a house. William later married Bessie Carlisle, and the two moved to Brantford to operate a store. Together they had 5 children: Alfred, Albert, Edwin, Jessie, and Alexandra. Alfred and Albert were left to run the Whiteman's Creek Mill in 1889. The Apps operation was the first to bring in a carload of Western wheat for flour, and they also inaugurated a shipping depot at the Mount Vernon train station. This allowed farmers a ready market for their products. The Apps brothers ran their operation in Brant County for over 30 years, and their site near Whiteman's Creek has been classified a historic site. And Sil Apps, the famous local hockey player, was the grandson of William Apps. Thanks for joining us this week on episode 2 of the Brant Historical Society podcast. If you're interested in learning more about one of our pioneer families, join us in 2 weeks' time for episode 3, What a Good Life, Bits and Pieces of Life at Myrtleville, Part 1, which is premiering on August 8th, 2020. See you then.